Alright guys, hope you're all keeping safe. PTS Phase 2 is ended as of today, and there were a lot of changes made with Phase 2. Some were very unexpected ones, like the increased NPC resistances to status effects. This is probably the most controversial change right now. Today I wanted to go over what the community has been saying about these changes, like the NPC resistances, loot quality, the M1A power, and whether that's still a viable weapon in at least Phase 2 of the PTS, and more. If you enjoy this one, drop a like down below and subscribe for Division 2 content. We're very close to 50k subscribers, guys, so if you haven't subscribed to it already, then please do. And with that said, let's begin. All of the news on how these changes are shaping up for Title Update 10 has come from the forums, like Reddit and the official Ubi forums, because I've not been able to actually play the PTS myself as a console owner of the game and not PC owner. I do hope they consider the console audience for the next one. They have done it before, and I think it really does make a difference to how the PTS goes, and normally a very positive impact as well. With that said, the first thing I wanted to give you guys a heads up on is the NPC resistances change with Phase 2, because this has had quite a big impact on CC builds, with a lot of people saying it's probably gone too far, and they've been nerfed substantially. It's worth noting the changes only affect heroic and legendary difficulty, so anything below that is unaffected. And firstly, before I go over the feedback, there are some obvious reasons why the devs introduced these specific changes, one of which the devs addressed in the patch notes. They actually said, "We've seen players' concerns about higher difficulties becoming too easy. Looking at game data and player strategies, NPCs in Legendary and Heroic are often too easily trivialized using status effects. In these top difficulties, we are proposing to raise NPC resistance to status effects to prevent them getting indefinitely locked in status effect reactions. This is a first pass, and we will make adjustments for TU10 where needed." Secondly, I think the devs were not just concerned about heroic and legendary difficulty becoming maybe too trivial for some people, equally scared about the effect this could have on the Iron Horse raid, due to come out just after TU10 drops. So, what's the feedback so far? Well, as I said at the start, this is very controversial, and I would say for the most part, it's been fairly negative, to be honest, mainly because CC builds were absolutely essential to a group composition when it came to harder content, and these changes look to nerf that role. More than anything, some players were finally getting their ultimate kind of CC builds together, and now they've been nerfed. So, you know, you kind of have that thing where you're building something for so long, the devs come in, and as with a lot of stuff, they nerf it so that it's no longer as viable. The question I have is, was anyone really complaining about heroic and legendary being too easy? Because I hadn't seen those complaints myself. One of the biggest nerfs that certainly went over my head with Phase 2 was the status damage effect of these resistance changes. Sentinel Zero on one of the forums actually made a list of the few things that were affected as a result. So the whole firewall spec has been affected. Talents like Trauma, Pyro, Eyeless, and other named items. Fire skills like Firestarter or Airburst Seeker, Bleed from Hive or other sources, Ongoing Directive gear set, Imperial Dynasty, Exotic. The changes come into the BTSU data gloves, and you just gotta have a look at the Hive to see that. Creeping Death talent, if you combine it with the status damage. Any damage status talents like Perpetuation, the up-and-coming or new Exotic Vial Mask, the new set Eclipse Protocol, and that's just to name a few. If you take the new Exotic Vial Mask, for example, and the two talents, the first one, status effects also apply a damage over time debuff for 10 seconds, but more importantly, the second one, total damage dealt is equal to 50% of your concussion grenade damage and increased by your status effect attributes. Well, due to obviously the changes that they made with Phase 2, this basically was a nerf as a result of that. Any status effect damage items in the game are going to be affected by this, meaning that if if these are not buffed to account for these changes, you just got to look at something like Perpetuation, for example. If they're not buffed, then they're going to add very little value, and status effects damage builds will be severely impacted. Another post said that the skill duration is also very low now, and with no changes to skill cooldowns, your skill duration will run out twice as quickly as your skill will cool down, meaning there's actually no room for 100% uptime. I have seen other posts actually where I believe certain gear sets have been able to do that, but generally if you're using a branded skill build, then that's just not going to happen. Blind of Firefly does not cool down now until the effect has worn off as well. So that's a very big nerf, and I believe the devs are actually going to revert that nerf in Phase 3. Right now, guys, it would appear that CC builds and certainly status effect damage builds are going to be a lot less strong in harder difficulties come TU10. And more than anything, this is going to impact solo players more than groups, because if you're in a group, you can make up for that by having at least 2 CC players, whereas as a solo, that's just not going to happen. And in another post from someone called ITMX, they gave some numbers to really put this in perspective, guys. Any CC build with a Blind of Firefly is 75% less effective because of the long cooldown and short duration, plus the cooldown starting after the blindness is actually over. Any CC build using EMPs is 50% less effective, especially against elite mini-tanks, and sometimes, even if they are EMP, they still keep shooting at you. Any CC build using Shock or Burn is 100% unusable against any faction tank on Heroic and on Legendary thanks to previous nerfs. Any CC build using any sticky is 75% less effective because of the long cooldown and short duration, and the cooldown starting after a random timer. Any CC build using the Banshee is 75 to 80% less effective due to long cooldown and short duration, and cooldown starting after, again, another random timer. And also, nearly every CC build is 100% unusable against BTSU named bosses. So there you go, that's just to kind of put it in perspective as to how it's going in that respect. Let's see what the devs do for Phase 3, which is actually coming out tomorrow, and I believe we'll probably get the patch notes either later on today or probably tomorrow, so stay tuned for that, because I believe they are going to make some adjustments. I think they're aware that they probably went overboard, and they are probably going to scale it back a little bit. Now, moving on to loot, TU10 is due to have significant changes to loot. A few of the changes are updated item power distribution to have a better spread between minimum and maximum for all difficulties, and increased minimum roll item power for field proficiency in DZ caches, clan caches, and season caches. So that's good news. For the most part, I've seen positive posts on loot drops from both NPCs and caches. Plenty of posts have showed rolls people have got from control point crates and regular NPC drops, which with most of them looking much better now and more consistent for the difficulty you're actually going to be playing on. I say for the most part because I've seen one or two posts of legendary loot which showed very low rolls. One was especially low, and I think that might have been a bug, but the other one was like 50% for the first 2 attributes and then 100% for the other one. And this is kind of where there is a slight problem. A 50% minimum roll for legendary drops is just, in my opinion, way too low. I think you should be looking at a minimum of like 80% on legendary, in my opinion, and I hope the devs look into this further, because I think that's not going to be overly rewarding for some players. Another trend I've seen is very little rolls with 2 or more max attributes, but instead 1 max and then 2 less than max. And what this means is that with only 1 recal available for max rolls, then it's still gonna be hard to get those max rolls, right? Because you're gonna have, say you got 3 attributes, you're gonna have 1 roll at max, 2 that are rolled less. You're gonna only be able to roll 1 of those up to max, so you're never gonna truly get a fully max rolled item. But for the most part, guys, loot drop rolls appear to be way better with TU10, and I think this is very good news. I think this is news that people want to hear, so that's very, very encouraging. What I will say and what I will recommend, guys, is that everyone try their best to start playing challenging content at a minimum, if you're not already, as anything below that, hard or below, will still have purple gear drops. This is something that I don't think should happen, but it's something that is going to be coming. So I'd highly recommend you try your best to get up to legendary as a minimum, and that way you're not going to get those purple drops, you're not going to be disappointed, and also you're always going to want to try and do the hardest content possible, because that way you've got a better chance of getting the best gear, and that will definitely apply with TU10 and the changes that are being made here and what people are testing so far. Just briefly want to bring up the M1A and the weapon buffs. I've seen some really positive posts about the Chameleon actually being a really good weapon in its current state on the PTS, which again is really good news. I love the Chameleon, but at the moment in the live game it's pretty poor, so it's good to hear that this weapon might actually be very, very viable. For you M1A lovers, and that definitely includes me, it's pretty much the only weapon I've used for the last month or whatever, probably longer than that. The M1A appears to still be possibly the best rifle and best weapon with the right build currently on the PTS, but unlike the live game, a lot more weapons closely follow behind it now, so you won't feel as though you just have to use the M1A. You know, you could use the Eagle Bearer, or you could use the Bighorn, which appears to be, and this is something I'm going to cover in probably a future video, appears to be one of the best weapons actually at the moment with Phase 2, based on burst DPS and sustain as well. So that's quite interesting. I think a lot of players were concerned the M1A would be nerfed into oblivion, and you know, rightly so, because Massive, they do have a habit of doing that to anything that's an outlier, but that's not the case, which is really good to see. You know, they did do this little nerf, but then they brought everything up to its level, and that's exactly what players wanted. What I have seen, however, is there's still some work to be done on some weapons which are still underpowered, and you're always going to have the meta weapon, right? You're always going to have the best weapon, and then you're always going to have the worst weapon, but it's the difference between the best and the worst that really needs to be kind of brought into a minimum, and that's the way you get balance. It's never going to be perfect though, and I think overall the weapon changes look to be positive. And again, I might do another video soon with the DPS numbers. There was a spreadsheet put out on the forums where someone had went in and did the burst DPS, sustained DPS of all the weapons currently in Phase 2. And it's very interesting because, yeah, there's some weapons that you wouldn't think that would be really, really strong. But for example, the L860 LMG has the best burst DPS for any LMG in the game. And that was surprising to me. But I'll go over that probably in a future video, because at the moment at least we don't know what changes are coming with Phase 3, and maybe that will change. But that's it for today's video, guys. Thanks very much for watching. What I will say is that at the moment, at least from what I'm seeing on the forums, the feedback is mostly positive. There are some negative ones about stuff that's maybe not working as it should do, or certainly the NPC Resistance is one, which again I think they're going to scale back. We'll see what they do with Phase 3, and then I'll probably do a follow-up video to that with people's feedback and stuff next week, and I will have the patch notes covered in a video probably tomorrow, guys. So thanks very much for watching. Thanks for all of your support, guys, and until the next one, epic out.